Oysters have been part of the human diet for millennia. Their shells can be found in coastal refuse mounds, kind of like the one here at the Indian Temple Mound in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, a site that was of great cultural importance to the people that lived here 1,000 years ago. It stands as a relic, continuously connecting us to the people who lived here long ago. Hundreds of millions of years before humans walked the earth, the animal family Ostreidae began settling in marine waterbeds. Despite their simple appearance, oysters have a 3-chambered heart, 2 kidneys, and 3 nerve cords. They're what's known as a keystone species because of their ability to provide shelter and water filtration. They can filter up to several gallons of water per day, removing toxins and clearing the water column. They also filter out nitrogen-containing compounds, many of which can be found in fertilizer in our wastewater runoff. By filtering out the water column, they increase sunlight available to photosynthesizing seagrass beds and also provide a food source as the bottom level of the food chain to animals higher up the food chain. Oysters were once considered food for the common people, but due to overharvesting, have now become a delicacy. One 1988 estimate of oysters in the Chesapeake Bay found that pre-colonial oyster populations could have filtered out the bay's water in about 3 days, whereas the modern oyster population would require almost a full year. Baltimore, Maryland, the famous seafood city along the Chesapeake, became a lead supplier of oysters across the country, first shipping out via ice along railroads, and then as canning became more popular, shipped out via trucks. Seafood export in Baltimore could be seen as a microcosm for a more general tendency of our enabling of food convenience, allowing anyone anywhere to get the food they want when they want.
My name is Rachel Gwynn. I'm the Senior Program Manager and I manage ZBA's restoration program. The oyster shell recycling program we started in 2010, and we go around to local restaurants and collect oyster shells from the restaurant to dry off and then be used in future restoration projects and go into the bay to be habitat.
I got to join the Choctawhatchee Basin Alliance on an excursion building these reefs, and we ended up using limestone on the specific build that we were doing. Rachel speaks about it more here while we use the limestone.
So oysters love to settle on what their shell is made of, calcium carbonate. So in the wild and nature, they would be settling on their own shell, and then that's how they create so much habitat. They just kind of keep expanding. Also, how the shells are, there's so much rough surface that the oysters can attach on there well and shelter while they're smaller from wave energy and have a better chance at being protected from predators. The limestone we use because it is also calcium carbonate, so something with a similar chemical makeup to their shell, and also if that has kind of a rougher texture, it's easier for them to attach to.
Also, they mentioned that using oyster shells would be better suited for subtidal marine environments rather than the intertidal zone that we were working in. After several hours of what seemed like rolling a boulder up a hill and watching it fall down again, we finally were able to complete several reef area buffers with the limestone. The limestone rocks serve as an anchor point which helps to prevent erosion from waves and stabilizes that intertidal habitat. This allows seagrass to grow, which, along with the oysters, helps to provide for a diverse habitat for plants and animals. Human structures like seawalls, however, can eliminate the possibility of this intertidal zone from forming, which once again leads to erosion and just a decrease in the diversity of animal and plant. The Marine Environmental Science Organization, NOAA, identifies 3 ecological benefits to these oyster restoration programs. The first is establishing safety and habitat for smaller marine animals. The second is nutrient and particle cycling, which provides for growth for seagrass beds, which again only provides more food, safety, and habitat for smaller marine animals. And then finally, these reefs provide a buffer against erosion, which establishes a habitat for smaller marine animals protected against waves, floods, and tides. These 3 benefits identified by NOAA coincide with planetary boundaries, a concept established by the University of Stockholm in Sweden. When crossed, they increase the risk of irreversible environmental damage. The 3 coinciding planetary boundaries are a diversity of ecosystems, the nitrogen cycling, and the prevention of land erosion. As you can see here, climate change is only one of the 9 environmental boundaries, despite all that we hear and all the focus that is put on it. 6 of these boundaries, including the 3 that were mentioned previously, have already been crossed according to the University of Stockholm. Coalitions such as the oyster recycling and restoration programs, while they lack capitalistic feasibility, allow us to begin tackling these boundaries and lowering the impact of our resource utilization on the environment.
I've been here for 13 years, and I think I've always gravitated towards restoration. Even in the beginning, it was my favorite, and I think just it's so tangible. Like, you could, we built the reefs today, and you'll come back in a couple months and just to see oysters on them and all the life that's there. So like really like that sense of accomplishment and like being part of a bigger picture of knowing that you helped foster that change.
The oyster recycling and restoration programs serve as an excellent example of reuse and recycling of our resources. However, it's important that we also think of ways of reducing resources, and this can be best encapsulated in the concept of degrowth. It's commonly believed that growth of economic markers such as GDP are markers of wellness and prosperity in a country. However, there are many external factors, especially environmental, that are excluded from these markers. So by applying degrowth to our use of oysters, what would that look like? I think it would emphasize and normalize plant-based diets in a way that Scott Anderson talks about here.
I think the problem with veganism isn't so much that people don't understand veganism or they don't believe animal cruelty is bad. In fact, I think it has nothing to do with that at all. I think people fundamentally don't feel empowered to make the decision to be vegan. They don't know what vegan food or nutrition looks like. And so it is our responsibility as people who are vegan not to convert, but to normalize.
So by focusing less on the oyster as a commodity and more on the oyster as an animal, we can begin to celebrate them more for the diverse intertidal environments that they help to create. The reason I chose to explore the oyster recycling and restoration program is because it's rather unique. It focuses on returning the resources we use to the environment rather than just recycling them for our own use. If we can transpose this idea onto other resources that we use, we can begin to find a more stable balance in our environment. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this one, I'll have another video linked at the end of one I did on clothing waste, which you might find interesting. I hope that you find time to think of yourself less this week, and as always,